It was supposed to be just another overnight haul for Jason, a seasoned trucker with nearly 15 years of experience on the road. He had driven every major highway in the lower 48 and thought he'd seen it all. Strange fog banks, odd flashing lights in the sky, even a few unexplained mechanical glitches at isolated rest stops. But none of that came close to what he encountered one cold autumn night on a stretch of rural highway somewhere in northern New Mexico. The job was simple enough, a long, straight run from Flagstaff, Arizona to Amarillo, Texas. The route was one Jason had taken dozens of times, and it always felt the same: lonely, quiet, with a haunting stillness that blanketed the desert at night. He set off around 7 p.m. after grabbing a strong coffee and topping off his fuel. The truck was in good shape, the weather was clear, and traffic was unusually light. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. Around midnight, Jason was somewhere near the halfway point when he first saw it. On the side of the road, just beyond the range of his headlights, stood a figure. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. But what caught his eye was how still the figure was, not moving, not shifting its weight, just standing motionless facing the road. He slowed a bit, instinctively watching to make sure the person didn't suddenly step into traffic, but they didn't. As he passed, the figure remained in place, and when Jason glanced at his mirror, it was gone. That would have been enough to unsettle anyone, but Jason chalked it up to fatigue and the tricks that shadows can play on the mind late at night. He turned up the radio to keep himself alert and kept moving. Another 30 miles went by, and he had nearly forgotten the incident when he saw the figure again. Same position, same silhouette, same stillness, this time on the opposite side of the road. Jason's stomach turned. There was no way a person could have covered that much distance on foot in that short amount of time, especially without a vehicle. He slowed the truck again and stared as he passed. The figure stood perfectly upright, facing the road, arms stiff at its sides. He tried to get a better look at the face, but the shadows made it impossible. It was just a dark outline, almost human, but just off enough to feel wrong. For the next hour, it happened again and again. Every 20 to 30 miles, the same figure would appear, always standing at the edge of the road, always motionless, always watching. Jason started to feel like he was being tracked. His skin crawled, and a pressure built in his chest, a rising panic that made it harder and harder to breathe. He kept checking his mirrors and the road behind him, hoping and praying that there might be some sign of other traffic. But he was alone, completely, utterly alone. He thought about pulling over and calling someone, maybe reporting a suspicious person loitering on the highway, but something deep in his gut warned him not to stop. It wasn't just fear, it was the sense that whatever this thing was, it wanted him to stop. It wanted him vulnerable. So he pressed on, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the roadside with every mile. Mark had been driving rigs for almost a decade, long enough to grow numb to the routines of the job-long nights, endless roads, and the low, persistent hum of the engine beneath him. He preferred night runs, fewer cars, cooler temperatures, and less noise. He always said the road at night had a rhythm, a kind of silence that made it easier to think. But there was one night that broke that peace entirely, a run from Boise, Idaho down to Reno. Nevada, simple, straight through, nothing unusual on paper. What started as just another delivery ended up becoming the most terrifying night of his life. It was just past midnight when he first noticed the truck behind him. He'd stopped earlier at a tiny gas station outside of Winnemucca to refill and grab a snack. The place was quiet, the kind of station that didn't even have music playing inside, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the tired stare of the cashier. Mark didn't notice anyone else around. He pulled out and hit the road again, enjoying the solitude of the empty highway. But within 15 minutes, he saw headlights behind him in the mirror, just one set, staying a consistent distance behind. At first, he thought nothing of it. Trucks followed each other all the time on long routes, especially when rest stops were far apart. He figured the driver was just sticking close for visibility or maybe heading to the same destination. But after nearly 45 minutes of maintaining the exact same distance, never passing, never falling behind, he started to get uneasy. He slowed slightly to let the other driver pass if they wanted. The headlights matched his speed exactly. He sped up a bit. Same result. Whoever was behind him was mimicking his movements perfectly. Mark clicked his CB radio, calling out to see if the driver would respond. "Got a shadow back there?" he asked into the mic. No answer. He repeated the message, even gave his location and direction. Silence. The radio was working fine. He had just chatted with a buddy not long before. Whoever was behind him either wasn't listening or didn't want to talk. The stretch of road they were on was remote, flanked by open desert and jagged hills, no towns or exits for miles. Mark scanned the mirrors again, trying to get a better look at the truck's make or company markings. Nothing. The headlights were too bright to make out anything beyond the glare. It was strange, though. No company logos, no reflective stickers, and nothing to indicate who the truck belonged to. It looked completely unmarked. He started to feel a growing sense of dread. There was something predatory about the way the truck followed him, always there, always the same distance behind, never changing. It didn't behave like a normal vehicle. Even more unnerving, whenever he switched lanes or made a slight swerve to test the driver's reaction, the truck behind responded instantly. No delay. As if it were anticipating his every move, he passed a small roadside turnout and considered pulling over, maybe letting the driver go by, maybe even confronting them. But something about that idea made his skin crawl. He couldn't explain it, but the thought of stopping, of being face to face with whoever was behind that wheel, filled him with raw, animal fear. He stayed on the road. After almost 2 hours of this silent chase, Mark's nerves were on edge. He tried calling dispatch just to check in, but the signal was weak and kept cutting out. He wasn't sure if his messages were getting through. His hands trembled slightly, and his breathing was shallow. He kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting the truck behind him to suddenly lurch forward or flash its brights or do anything to break the tension. But it didn't. It just followed. Then something even stranger happened. As he came over a long, empty hill, he noticed that the headlights behind him suddenly disappeared. No swerving, no slowing down, just gone. 1 second there, the next to nothing. Mark blinked, leaned forward, squinting into the darkness behind him. There were no exits, no roads to turn off on, and certainly no room to hide a full-sized rig in the flat open desert. He slowed down, heart pounding. Where could it have gone? He kept driving, trying to convince himself that maybe he'd just imagined it. Maybe the truck turned off its lights or something. But deep down, he didn't believe that. A truck couldn't just vanish like that, not in the middle of nowhere. 10 minutes later, his blood ran cold. In his mirror, those headlights again. Same distance, same angle, same eerie silence. It was like it had never left, like it had slipped behind some invisible curtain, only to reappear when he let his guard down. This time, Mark didn't call out. He didn't even try to communicate. He just kept driving, trying to hold it together, trying to focus on the road in front of him and ignore the creeping sensation that he was being toyed with. Eli was hauling a refrigerated trailer from Chicago to Salt Lake City, a route he'd done plenty of times before. It was a long, lonely trip cutting through stretches of farmland, flat plains, and endless highways. He had picked up his load, a sealed cargo unit from a meat processing plant, late in the afternoon. Everything was by the book, paperwork in order, trailer inspected and locked, refrigeration unit functioning smoothly. It was supposed to be a quiet night with nothing more than the steady hum of the road and the occasional check-in with dispatch. The first knock came a few hours after midnight. He was in western Nebraska, a stretch of I-80 where the exits get sparse and the world seems to go silent except for the wind. He had just passed a dimly lit rest stop but decided not to pull in. He wasn't tired yet, and he had time to make up. As he pushed forward into the dark, he heard 3 faint knocks. They came from the back of the truck, near the cargo trailer. Muffled, but sharp enough to notice. He froze for a moment, eyes shifting to the mirror. The highway behind him was empty. No cars, no headlights, just black road stretching behind him like a shadow that wouldn't go away. At first, he told himself it had to be the trailer settling. Sometimes the cargo shifted slightly, or the refrigeration unit made odd noises as the temperature adjusted. Still, there was something about the timing of 3 distinct knocks, spaced just seconds apart, that made him uneasy. He turned down the radio and listened. Nothing, just wind and tires. He shook it off and kept driving, trying to focus on the lines on the road. 15 minutes later, the knocks came again, this time louder. 4 quick crops of bam, 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 like someone hitting the inside wall of the trailer with a closed fist. Eli instinctively looked at the mirrors again. Still nothing behind him. He slowed slightly, hands tightening on the steering wheel. This wasn't normal. The trailer was sealed. He had checked it himself at the plant. The rear doors were locked. The padlock was intact, and the seal tag was untouched. The cargo was frozen meat, packed and stored on pallets. There was no way anything or anyone should be moving around back there. He pulled off at the next rest stop, a grim little place with only a few dim overhead lights and a single vending machine. No other vehicles were there. Eli stepped out of the cab, the chill air hitting him immediately. The night was dead silent. He walked to the rear of the trailer, the gravel crunching under his boots. Everything looked fine. Lock was in place, seal tag still secured. He put his ear to the metal. Nothing. He waited, listened, still nothing. Telling himself he was imagining things, maybe just a mix of road noise and nerves. He climbed back into the cab and got back on the road. But 20 minutes later, the knocking returned. This time it was different, longer, more aggressive. It sounded like something was trying to get out, a fist pounding on metal from the inside, over and over again, in bursts, like a pattern. Eli's heart began to race. He checked the mirrors, still no one following him, no cars nearby. He tried the CB radio. No response. He began to question his own sanity. Was he overtired, hallucinating? He was wide awake, hands steady, alert, but the noise didn't stop. It kept happening every few minutes, a pounding, scratching, sometimes even what sounded like faint dragging across the metal floor of the trailer, the kind of sound that sent shivers up your spine because your brain couldn't place what could be making it. He tried turning the music back on, loud enough to drown it out, but it didn't help. The sound was distinct, coming from a specific direction, and once you heard it, it was impossible to ignore. The worst part was that it never came when he was stopped, only when he was moving. Every time he pulled over, silence. But the second he got up to speed again, the knocking returned. By the time he reached Wyoming, Eli was a wreck. He had barely eaten, barely spoken. His mouth was dry and his palms were slick with sweat. He debated calling the highway patrol or finding a way station to ask for help. But what would he even say? That he thought something was moving in his locked cargo? They'd think he was high or sleep deprived. He passed through a small town just before dawn and decided to take a detour to a trucker-friendly diner he remembered from a previous run. When he parked, he took a moment to breathe, engine idling softly. The knocks had stopped again. He forced himself to go check the trailer. Same result. Everything appeared untouched, still locked, still sealed. He walked around the truck with a flashlight, looking for any sign of damage or tampering, anything that would explain the noise. Nothing. Still, that didn't explain the pounding, the dragging, the occasional thud like something falling over. He opened his logbook to double-check the cargo manifest. Frozen beef, sealed pallets, nothing unusual. Then his eyes stopped on a note in the margin, barely legible, scrawled in tiny handwriting next to the signature of the loading manager. 3 words, "Do not open."